Oh, hi. Being a rook is a pretty great gig. I'm pretty straightforward, nice place to live, and I'm usually one of the last ones standing. But even after centuries of being on the board, there was one thing that didn't make sense. How do we actually know who's best? Maybe I mean a piece, or maybe I mean a player. Of course I'm talking about a player. Ooh. But why is who is the best even a question? Today we have this system that ranks everyone, from the world champ to the kid playing on their phone after school. And we call it Elo. If you ever played League of Legends, Overwatch 2, or even Golden Tee, and wondered why you matched with someone who annihilated you, thank Elo for that. But it's not just video games. This system is the engine behind FIFA's world rankings, the logic used for the NFL power rankings, and like chess, even the foundation for how the World Scrabble Championship decides who is a master. These are just a few examples of the gauge used for measuring human skill. What does that acronym stand for? ELO, Electronic League something? No, actually nothing. It's not an acronym, it's the name of a guy. This guy, to be precise, Arpad Elo. Arpad Elo, born in 1903 at Ceausescu, Hungary, eventually to become a physics professor at Marquette University, he was also a powerhouse on the board with a peak rating of 2230 in 8 state championships. He was a figure in the chess world for decades, also serving as the president of the American Chess Federation in the 30s, and is in the World Chess Hall of Fame, the 11th person inducted. As a matter of fact, he knows chess. In 1959, when the U.S. Chess Federation needed to replace their existing ranking system, they turned to Arpad. At the time, they were using the Harkness system. It was a blunt instrument, an inelegant calculation that basically averaged player scores. It was flawed. For example, a strong titled player could win a game against someone much weaker and actually see their ratings drop because the average score was too low. Arpad approached the board with a focus on statistical theory. He framed a player's performance as a variable that fluctuates game to game. He applied the normal distribution, a classic bell curve, to calculate the probability of an outcome based on the rating gap between two different players. But there's already an issue. Humans are more chaotic than a perfect curve suggests. Real-world results show that extreme upsets happen more often than the math predicted. So we have these fat tails in our performance. I'll get into that later. Moments where a novice plays out of their mind, or a title player completely collapses. Arpad preferred normal distribution, but as chess competition advanced, the systems had to advance with it. Most modern federations eventually swapped that standard bell curve for the logistic distribution curve. While these two curves look similar, the logistic model is mathematically heavier at the ends. It assumes that extreme outliers aren't just statistical accidents, but a natural part of competition. It gives the math more leeway at the edges to account for the unpredictability of humans. Once you have that distribution, you can build the actual system. And here you can sub in anything, Splatoon, Rocket League, or even chess. Going forward as well, I'm going to be calling a player with, let's say, a 2000 ELO, a 2000, or a 2200 is someone with a 2200 ELO. Just a lot easier to say than a player with a 2000 ELO. So, hold your knights, it's math time. Get it, knights? But if a 2200 plays an 1800, that 400 point gap changes everything. Arpad specifically scaled the math so that 400 points represents a 10-to-1 advantage in scoring. It's the reason the rating scale has the range that it does. In this scenario, the EA becomes 0.9, meaning the system expects the master to win 90% of the time. Now once the game is over, the system compares that prediction to reality using the update formula. This is where we see the variables that Harkness was missing. R prime A is your new rating, SA is your actual score, 1 for a win, 0 for a loss, and half for a draw. And then there's K, the K factor. Think of this as the speedometer of your rating. Arpad realized we needed a way to tell the system how much to trust a single result. If the K factor is high, your rating swings wildly. If it's low, your rating is stable and hard to move. In the other case, if the master wins, they only beat the expectation by 0.1. If their K factor is 10, they only gained one single point. The system expected them to win. It's not impressed. But if that 1800 rated player pulls that upset, they've beaten the expectation by 0.9 or 90%, and they get a 9-point jump. Yay. The math assumes a player's skill is fixed, but ratings are actually moving targets. This is why the K factor varies based on a player's history. The system treats different players with different levels of confidence. A veteran with thousands of games has an established rating. Because their skill level is proven over time, the system uses a lower K factor. Their rating stays stable because the math treats a single loss as a data point rather than a permanent decline in ability. New players, or rapidly improving juniors, use a larger K factor. If a player's skill is increasing faster than the system can record it, a higher K factor allows the ratings to adjust by 30 or 40 points a game rather than 5. It's the mathematical correction intended to align the rating with actual performance as quickly as possible. Age also forces the system to adapt, but in the opposite direction. As players age, their performance may decline, but because they have a low K factor, their ratings are more sticky and they drop slowly. To manage this, many federations use a rating floor. This prevents a rating from falling below a certain threshold, regardless of the results. And if it does, the player is removed from the rating pool. But glancing over these ratings, there is a trend. In 1970, there was only one player in the world over 2,700, Bobby Fischer. Today, February 2026, there are 30, and 15 of those have had peaks over 2,800. This leads to the great Elo debate. Is a 2,700 today weaker than a 2,700 from decades ago? And more importantly, who would win? Think of Elo like experience points. Every new player who joins starts at level 1, bringing a small amount of experience into the world. But because beginners are still learning, they frequently lose bouts to higher level players. When they lose, that experience doesn't vanish, it gets transferred to the winner. This creates an experience food chain. The experience from lower level players is obtained and gained by the higher players. Eventually, all that low level XP trends to the very top of the leaderboard. This is rating inflation. The more new players you have entering the game, the more total XP there is, causing the scores to go higher. If new players stop joining, the XP supply would dry up, and it would become nearly impossible for anyone to reach a new high score. But there's a counter argument: deflation. Every time a veteran player retires with a high rating, those points vanish. They take their XP off the board forever. And to complicate things, computers have made everyone objectively better. A 2200 rated master today likely knows more theory than a 2200 rated master from the 19th century. If the rating scale is a moving number, comparing players across centuries seems impossible. A rating from 1920 is a measurement of that player against their peers, not against ours. So we really can't measure one generation against the next mathematically. But we're going to do it anyways because it's fun. We can bridge this gap using retrospective analysis. By treating the entire history of recorded chess as one massive, continuous data set, we can apply the same mathematical yardstick to every era. This measures how many games a player won, but more critically, it measures their degree of dominance over their peers. Most of this data was pulled from chessmetrics.com and the work of Jeff Sonis. When we calculate an estimated peak Elo, we aren't just looking at the number on their old FIDE profile. We're looking at how far above the level of their own era they managed to climb. This allows us to map the history of human skill on that single line I mentioned. When you look at this, you aren't just seeing scores. You're seeing the estimated history of chess progression mapped out for you. To understand where we are today, we have to look at the people who define the rungs of this ladder, who's sitting at each step, and of course, for some, who are the highest by estimated peak value. not highest Elo. This list is full of examples, so if you don't see your favorites here, it's because I hate them and they're bozos. But the way I calculated this was simple. Are you still active? I'm taking your peak classical rating. Inactive? I'm going by your estimate. Does that mix math systems to throw off this whole list? Yeah, of course it does. Does it matter? Nah, this is for fun, and you know how seriously FIDE takes things. To envision the scale that Arpad built, let's check it out. Starts at the floor with the 400 rated novice, and as you move up, you're increasing in skill. By 600, you're a beginner. 800, you're an improving amateur. Here I am, 1000-ish. At 1200, you become a casual club player, which leads to the 1400 and 1600 experienced club player levels. And by the time you hit 1800, you're a strong club player in the air. It's getting a little thin up there. It's worth noting though that 400 to 1800, they're not titles, they're just estimates put to words of where a player sits on that scale. The real prestige kicks in when you hit the official open titles. First, Candidate Master at 2200, followed by FIDE Master at 2300, International Master at 2400, and finally, the peak of that mountain, Grandmaster at 2500. Each of these, beyond having a ratings goal, also requires certain performances or norms in tournaments. And don't forget that this scale is not linear. 100 points between 2200 and 2300 is a lot different than between 23 and 2400. Each level is almost exponentially harder to increase to that next level. Now moving into players, we see the names that define the game today. First I have to mention I am Levi Rosman at 2421, known to millions as Gotham Chess. He's become one of the most influential and decisive voices in the game today, bridging the gap between high-level play and the massive global online audience. GM Vaishali Rameshbabu at 2506. She made history alongside her brother Pragnananda as the first sibling duo to both hold the Grandmaster title. Near and dear are prodigies like I am Faustino Oro at 2516. They call him the Messi of chess for a reason. At just 12 years old, he's already smashing records and became the youngest player ever to become an IM, to earn a GM norm, and to hit that 2500 mark. 2647. I have to mention Daniel Naroditsky, as it feels wrong to put him in the inactives. And I'll just leave it at that. Even a patcher like myself was able to learn from him, and I miss and love you, Daniel. But as the ratings climb, you'll bump into GM Hans Niemann at 2738. Whether he's in the middle of a controversy or an incredible tournament run, he's one of the most intense and talked about competitors on the circuit. Following that is GM Gukesh D at 2794. He isn't just a top tier player, he's the youngest world champion in history, a title he earned in late 2024 at just 18 years old. Higher up we see GM Hikaru Nakamura at 2816, who is known for his speed chess, his juicers, and being a top tier classical contender. GM Levant Aronian, who reached an incredible peak of 2830, a testament to a creative genius who has been a mainstay at the top for decades in both chess and his fashionable shirts. Next is GM Fabiano Caruana, who hit a staggering peak of 2844. His preparation is so legendary, he once went through an entire World Championship match without losing a single classical game. Few rival his opening prep. And finally, at the absolute summit sits GM Magnus Carlsen at 2882. Widely considered the greatest to ever play, he has dominated the world rankings for over a decade, pushing the boundaries of what's possible at the highest level of chess. Now it's time for some fun. Let's layer in the historic Elo estimations to see how today's stars stack up. We're going to have to look at the giants of the past, the players of history who paved the way for all of this. Starting with the man who invented the very system we're using, NM or National Master Arpad Elo sits at an estimated 2230. A list like this must have GM Judith Polgar at 2735. The greatest female player ever who spent years proving she could take down any of the world's elite. Just above her is the pride of American chess, Paul Morphy at 2743. Many people consider him the first unofficial world champion. Moving into Soviet era dominance, we have GM Boris Spassky at 2773, followed by the Iron Tigran, GM Tigran Petrosian at 27.96. Then comes the Magician from Riga, GM Mikhail Tal, whose attacking brilliance earns him a 27.99. Right next to the Endgame Maestro, GM Vasily Simislav at 2,800. As we climb higher into the all-time greats, we get the first official world champion, Champion William Steinitz at 28.26. And the man who held the crown for 27 years, Champion Emmanuel Lasker at 28.28. Then we reach the legendary rivalry, GM Anatoly Karpov at 28.48, and the beast from Baku, GM Garry Kasparov at 28.51. The ratings reach near mythical levels with Champion Alexander Alekhine at 28.60, and the chess machine, Champion Jose Raul Capablanca at 28.77. Finally, at the near peak of the historical charts, we have the father of the Soviet school, GM Mikhail Boltmanik at 28.85, and the man who single-handedly took it down, GM Bobby Fischer at a staggering 28.95. So there's your mathematically unsound top 10. Don't know how the statisticians will feel mixing the systems up, but here we are. So your top 10, Lasker, Emmanuel Lasker, 28.28, Oronin in his shirts, 28.30, Fabi, 28.44, Karpov, 28.48, Kasparov, 28.51, Alekhine, 28.60, Kappa, 28.77, Carlsen, 28.82, Botmanik, 28.85, and Robert James Fischer, 28.95. Arpad Elo once compared a rating to a float on the waves. It's never still. It fluctuates with the wind, the tide, and the chaos of the game. Sometimes it causes a complex zugzwang of emotions. Okay, that was a bit much. In the years since Arpad applied this system to chess, the math has been stretched and rewritten for a digital age. We've added those fat tails to the distributions and used computers to track millions of games an hour, but the core concept is still his. Whether you're a Grandmaster fighting for one rating point at Click on Z, or a newcomer in their first over-the-board tournament, it all comes back to that formula. It takes the performance of your last game, weighs it against every other game you've ever played, and updates your ratings to match. Arpad himself was always clear about the goal. He said the system was a measuring tool, not a device of reward or punishment. He didn't just give us a number. He gave us a way to see the board clearly. Look, I'm a rook. I move back and forth. But Arpad Elo, he was a king. He showed us how high we can actually go. Don't guess. Data test.